The wind whistled low across the canyon, bending tall grass and lifting the dust like a whisper from the old spirits. Somewhere deep in the land between the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and the desert's edge, a young Apache girl moved alone beneath the setting sun. Her name was Naline, meaning she who walks silently. She was 12, barefoot, her long black hair tangled by the wind, and her eyes too wise for her age. Blood stained her skirt, though not her own. The red was dry now, crusted like old rust across the fabric. She didn't look at it, didn't need to. Her village had burned 3 nights earlier, torched by white mercenaries chasing rumors of gold that ran beneath her people's sacred land. The invaders came without warning. Guns and fire, screams, smoke so thick it swallowed the stars. By the time the horses stopped screaming, most of the villagers were gone, but Naline had survived. Now she walked. She followed the path of the crows. Her grandmother had always said, "When the crows fly west, they lead the living away from death." So she did as she was taught. She watched the black wings drift on the wind, dancing ahead like they carried some silent message from the ancestors. Her bare feet pressed into the dry earth. Thorns and stones cut at her skin, but she didn't cry. Pain meant she was still here. Pain was something the dead couldn't feel. Around her, the world was turning gold, the long shadows of the canyon reaching like fingers to pull the night over the land. Naline said no prayers. She had none left, but she did carry something, a carved wooden flute, the one her grandmother had given her the day she learned to speak with the wind. She also carried a flint knife, dulled by time but still sharp enough to defend a life. And more than either of those, she carried the song, the one that lived in her bones, passed from generations who had walked these lands long before names like New Mexico meant anything. As the last light left the sky, Naline found a rock ledge to crawl under. The sandstone was still warm from the sun, and the stars were just beginning to show. She lay there, clutching the flute to her chest, eyes wide open. Somewhere out there, her brother's voice still echoed in her ears. "Run, don't look back." She hadn't looked back. But now the silence was too heavy, so she lifted the flute to her lips and played the morning song, slow, soft, almost too quiet for the wind to carry. It wasn't for her. It was for them, her people, her ancestors, and the spirits who listened when no one else did. Unbeknownst to Naline, her song drifted farther than she knew, carried through the gulches and across the brittle hills. And not far behind her, riding slow and quiet, a lone cowboy followed a trail of hoof prints and ashes. He was a hard man with a rifle slung over one shoulder and a past heavier than his saddle. His horse walked with a rhythm born of long miles and quiet pursuits. He wasn't tracking gold. He wasn't tracking men. Not yet. But something in the smoke he'd seen rising days before had stirred a long-buried part of him, the part that hadn't quite forgotten how to care. And soon, he would find more than the broken remnants of a burned-out village. He would find a girl walking west, following the crows. Colt Dawson rode with the kind of stillness that only came from years spent on the wrong side of too many lines. He wasn't law, but he wasn't an outlaw either. He was the space in between, where gray men carried rifles, not morals, and rode to outrun ghosts rather than chase justice. He had once worn blue during the war. Carried a flag, followed orders, buried too many friends. But out here, no one asked what side you'd fought for. They only cared what you carried on your back and whether your word was worth spit. It had been 2 days since he found the burned village. Apache settlement, maybe 20 souls, all gone now. Some bodies still lay in the ashes left where they fell. Others had been taken, dragged behind horses like trash. Colt didn't linger. He didn't need to. He knew the kind of men who did this. Mercenaries, gold chasers. Men who believed the West belonged to bullets and boots, not to old spirits or ancient soil. But one thing puzzled him. Tracks, one set. Barefoot, small, headed west. A child, alone. He hadn't planned to follow. But something in the way those prints moved, slow, steady, unbroken, pulled him forward. He told himself it was curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe a piece of something inside him he thought had died a long time ago. So when he heard the flute in the hills, soft and mournful, carried on the wind like a prayer that hadn't been answered, he knew someone had survived. Naline sat on a high boulder, legs crossed beneath her, flute at her lips, the wind curling through her tangled hair. She saw the rider before he saw her, a silhouette framed by the sun rising behind him. She didn't move, didn't play another note, just watched. He stopped his horse at the base of the hill, hand resting near his rifle but not drawing it. "You hurt?" he called up. No answer. "You got family?" Silence. Only the crows answered, circling above, calling with rough voices, as if to remind the earth of what it had lost. Colt tipped his hat back. "Ain't looking to cause trouble, girl. I just saw tracks. Didn't expect to find anyone left." Still she didn't speak. Her eyes scanned him, every movement, every twitch of his fingers, every shadow in his eyes. Finally, she said, "They are gone." Her voice was calm, not trembling, not afraid. Colt nodded slowly. "I figured." He dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "My name's Colt. Colt Dawson." She didn't give hers. Instead, she asked, "Why do you follow the dead?" Colt looked up at the crows. "Guess I didn't know I was." Naline studied him a moment longer, then climbed down from the rock, careful not to show the limp in her left foot. She didn't hide her pain, and she carried it like truth. "You hungry?" Colt asked. She nodded once. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a can of beans and a strip of dried venison, and handed them to her without a word. She took them carefully, sat cross-legged in the sand, and began to eat. For a long while, neither of them spoke. When she finished, she picked up her flute again and began to play, not a mourning song this time, but something slower, something with strength beneath the sorrow. Colt didn't recognize the melody, but he understood what it meant. It meant she wasn't done walking yet. The morning sun spilled warm and golden over the jagged cliffs as Colt and Naline set out together. The girl rode with a quiet confidence despite the limp in her left foot, her bare toes gripping the worn leather saddle as if it were an extension of herself. Colt noticed how her eyes scanned the horizon with a hunter's caution, always watching, always listening. For days, they traveled west, through scrub and sand, over dry creek beds, and past ancient petroglyphs carved into stone walls, silent witnesses to centuries of stories like Naline's. Colt was a man of few words, but Naline didn't mind. Her own speech was sparse, measured. She had no desire to speak of the horrors she'd survived, and Colt didn't ask. Instead, their companionship grew in shared silences, a language older than words. At night, by flickering campfires, Colt taught Naline how to ride bareback, how to handle a rifle safely, and how to read the signs left by other travelers. She in turn taught him the names of the stars, stories of the sky told through Apache legend, and sometimes, when the fire burned low and their hearts ached, she would play her flute. Not the mournful song of loss, but a melody of hope, of resilience. One evening, as they camped beneath a sky swollen with stars, Colt finally broke the silence. "You ever think about what comes after all this?" he asked, eyes fixed on the fire. Naline looked at him with steady calm. "The crows say life keeps moving. Even after fire burns the old trees, new ones grow." Colt nodded slowly, staring into the flames. "I ain't sure I know how to grow anymore." She reached out and placed a small, calloused hand on his. "You can learn," she said softly. Her words were simple but heavy with meaning. In that moment, Colt felt a flicker of something he'd buried deep, something like hope. But the West was not kind to those who wandered it alone. Shadows from the past stretched long across the land, and threats they could neither ignore nor outrun were closing in. The mercenaries who had razed Naline's village were no ordinary killers. They were ruthless men with greed like a cancer, and they hated loose ends. On the fourth day, as dawn cracked over a dusty ridge, Colt spotted them first, 3 riders. Their horses kicking up dirt like storms, their faces set hard beneath wide-brimmed hats. "They're coming," Colt whispered. His voice low but tense. Naline stood, her flute silent now. She flexed her injured foot, the limp sharper in the cold morning air. Yet her eyes shone fierce, the fierce pride of a girl who had lost everything but her spirit. Colt loaded his rifle, knowing full well the fight was coming. He glanced once at Naline, who nodded, ready to stand by his side or face the danger on her own. They waited as the riders drew near. The three men slowed as they recognized Colt, but their eyes flicked to Naline with something colder, contempt, maybe fear. Or something darker. One of the riders spat on the ground. "Thought you'd hide the brat, Dawson," the leader sneered. "But she's out here just like we said." "Makes it easier," Colt's jaw clenched. "She's under my protection now. You want a fight, you'll find one." The leader laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "You got a lot of nerve for a man who's been running." Naline stepped forward, flute hanging from her neck, her voice quiet but steady. "You will not take me." For a heartbeat, the world held its breath.